Support for This News is So Gay comes from the LGBTQ Plus Opportunity Fund of the Cleveland Foundation, leveraging philanthropy to empower LGBTQ plus communities. Welcome to This News is So Gay. I'm your host, Ken Schneck, editor of the Buckeye Flame, Ohio's LGBTQ plus newsroom. Thanks so much for joining us. Here's what we're covering on this week's episode. There were massive layoffs of journalists last week, including so many of our out LGBTQ plus colleagues. How are we responding to that? Marriage equality is back again in this week's news, this time with a ton of designated anti-LGBTQ plus hate groups forming their own little coalition. How concerned should people be? National Black HIV and AIDS Awareness Day just passed. Did that get the recognition it needed and deserved? And of course, queer joy. Where is our roundtable finding queer joy in the news right now? Joining us this week to answer those questions and so many more. It's a team that I cannot split up. I must keep them together. Senior staff writer for the Buckeye Flame, H.L. Comeriato. H, nice to see you.
It's nice to see you, Ken Schneck.
Managing editor for the Sero project and communications lead for the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus, Juan Michael Porter II, fresh in from Puerto Rico. Juan Michael Porter II, welcome back. You're in Manhattan, all is well. It's basically the same weather as Puerto Rico.
I was on a beach yesterday. Okay. What do you want from me?
This podcast is basically emotionally a beach. And technology reporter for the 19th, she who checks all of our math, Jasmine Matani. Jasmine, what a pleasure as always.
Happy to be here. It's a little chilly in LA right now. It's 72 degrees.
Yeah, so we just dropped Jasmine from the call, and it'll just be Juan, Michael, and H. No, we'll keep you on. Our LGBTQ plus reporters roundtable is now assembled, so let's dive in. So we've been starting the past couple of weeks asking our reporters on the roundtable how they're doing. A few weeks ago, we started that because of the fatalities in Minnesota. And then last week, because of the, arrest of our LGBTQ plus journalist colleagues. And then I was going to stop asking our roundtable how they were doing this week. And then there were these mass layoffs of journalists. More than a third of the Washington Post's newsroom, including past roundtable guests right here on This News is So Gay. So I need to again ask, how are you all doing? Jasmine, other than the weather, how are you doing in this journalism space?
I think holding up. I work at a place that values my perspective. I think the arrests, I think we really need to emphasize that they went after Black journalists and they went after independent, award-winning, but independent journalists, people who don't have the backing of an institution behind them anymore. And I'm also reflecting a lot with these Washington Post layoffs, how the racial reckoning of 2020 led to newsroom commitments towards diversity. There were a lot of new hires for roles in race and equity reporting. And 5 years later, we're seeing basically all of that tossed aside. We're seeing these layoffs impacting journalists of color, and they are leaving these institutions whiter and straighter, which is not meeting the needs of our country or our democracy in this moment.
I think we just end the podcast there, but let's see if folks have more. That was incredible and so on point. Juan Michael Porter II, how are you doing?
I'm hyper blessed. A year ago, my position was eliminated at thebody.com, and I was the only Black, the only gay, the only person living with HIV on staff. And then to see it happen to my peers across the country, it takes me back to that place of deep sadness. These are a lot of my friends, people who I've had drinks with, who I've done fellowships with, who have given me sources, who I've given sources to. And I think we're watching an attempt to silence the reporter base that holds people accountable. And I hope that the public sees it and does something to support these journalists so that they can continue doing the life-saving work that they've been doing all these years.
H.L. Comeriato, I must ask, how are you doing? I would caution you to remember, don't go off on your editor. He's right here on the line.
I'm doing so well. Everything is So good. Truly, the only thing I have to add is if you're in a position to do so, please hire and pay trans and queer journalists of color, period.
That's yeah. And we're seeing the Trans Journalists Association, we're seeing a lot of the organizations issue statements. Certainly the Trans Journalists Association is putting out a whole panoply of programming to address the current need, but certainly needs more support. And because someone emailed me, if folks want to go back a few episodes, we had the executive directors of the Trans Journalists Association and the National Association of LGBTQ journalists on the show. And I did say publicly I would start a recurring donation to the Trans Journalists Association. And someone obnoxiously wrote in and said, I bet you didn't do that. I did do that, and they could use your support. So stroll on over there and listen to that episode. Let's jump into this week's news. This is a bit of a weird one for us because we're about to have an identical conversation that the four of us had on August 20th. The questions are almost identical, and we're going to talk about marriage equality. Back on August, our lens was the thrice divorced Kim Davis's attempt to have the Supreme Court overturn marriage equality. And this time the context is a little bit different. And so, H, why don't you give us the context, set the stage for us, and tell us about this latest national coalition to overturn marriage equality?
Yeah, so after the Supreme Court declined to take up Kim Davis's case, experts say that there's not really, in this moment, another case that could overturn Obergefell. However, we're seeing some really powerful groups team up because they are indeed looking for a case. A lot of folks talk about looking for a quote unquote cleaner case than Kim Davis's was, something that would be a little easier to convince some of the conservative Supreme Court justices of. And the Daily Signal actually broke this story several days ago, but there's now a national coalition of groups that are seeking to overturn marriage equality, and they include several designated anti-LGBTQ hate groups designated by the Southern Poverty Law Center. One of those is the Center for Christian Virtue, which, Ken, you and I have reported on extensively at this point. The City Club of Cleveland just hosted the Center for Christian Virtue president, Aaron Baer, to much controversy and protest. So it includes that group, but it also includes some national groups like Family Research Council. And these are long-term, big-time players. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of influence. The president of Family Research Council is Tony Perkins, and he has widely been reported to have had unprecedented access to the White House during Trump's first term. He also was on the advisory board for Project 2025, which is now infamous. We know that that includes a lot of anti-LGBTQ stuff. So he was on the advisory board for that, and it shows. So these groups have now made a public statement, and they've launched this campaign to overturn marriage equality. And the campaign is really rooted in recycling these ideas that LGBTQ adults abuse children and that LGBTQ adults are a danger to children and should not parent children. That's one of the core tenets here. So the campaign is actually called Greater Than. The idea is that children are greater than the equality that LGBTQ people seek for themselves politically in every other way. So it's an interesting take, but it's not a new one. And we've seen this go poorly, and we've seen this go really well. What I can tell you for certain is that there's a lot of money and influence behind this. And the folks heading this have the ear of the president and some of his closest confidants. So we'll see how this goes.
I wanted to chime in because I am a survivor of childhood rape, years of it. And I want to say that the people who raped me repeatedly were straight married people who went to the church where I served as an altar boy. And no one ever thought to look at them. No one ever thought to think, why does that man who looks nothing like that young boy taking this kid out so late at night? Or why is this woman taking that young boy out at night? And it's shocking to me that they're looking for pedophiles when they're right there in their base. And I say that because pedophiles typically aren't straight or gay. They just prey on children. And as someone who has grown up and dealt with the abuse that was dealt to me as a child, and who has done everything in his power to protect my kids and to make sure that they never go through what I went through, I'm appalled that these people don't actually look to educating the kids in their life and giving them the things that they need to protect themselves. Instead, they are vilifying us when, again, the harm is happening in their bedrooms, in their camps. And I hope that at a certain point, people who get involved in this realize that, wait, whenever we look at the Epstein files, it's never a trans person. It's never like, a Black person. It's never a queer person. It is always, I don't want to point the finger at straight white men, but these let's just say these big billionaires.
Yeah. And that vilification doesn't seem to be rooted in popular opinion and what it is that the American people want. And so, Jasmine, it is seriously the same question that I asked you 6 months ago. What is the data telling us about whether Americans care about this?
So, like I said last time,
Yes.
I shared data from Gallup, which shows that two-thirds of Americans support marriage equality. It's been a steady increase since the 90s, since they've been asking this question. I cited Gallup because we didn't ask this on our poll, a little bit behind the scenes. We have a limited number of questions. Our partner SurveyMonkey is very generous and lets me ask 50, 60 questions. Um, and we are trying to decide what to include and what priority those should be. And after consulting with our LGBTQ plus reporters, Kate Sossin, and I believe I have to say this, inaugural guest Orion Rumler,
Yes.
this one just didn't make the cut. Gallup owns the approval question, and it's not productive to ask whether we think a right should be overturned. And I did get permission from Kate to share this. Kate said that if we ask if people think gay people should be married, we should also ask whether straight people should be married.
100%.
And neither of those questions appeared on the 19th News SurveyMonkey poll.
Yeah. And
I don't believe in straight marriage, actually. I'm
Well,
sorry. You're going to have to cut that. Sorry. I just wanted to make
No,
you all
it's
laugh. I just
absolutely
wanted to make
staying
you all
on.
laugh. Like,
No, it's 100% staying on. Although I will say you are seeing a lot of pushback. First of all, I'm seeing online Republicans, what I'm doing on conservative Twitter, we still don't know. But I am seeing people push back and say, first of all, this is not a winning issue for our party, right? At this point, we all have so many more out LGBTQ people in our lives, and we've attended their weddings, as President Trump has attended same-sex weddings. But also, okay, aren't you opening the door to having the conversation about shouldn't we be banning no-fault divorces? So that's kind of tied up in this as well. But Juan Michael, again, the same question that I asked you 6 months ago. What are our thoughts, and you get to determine all of our thoughts, on whether the LGBTQ plus community is going to care about this? Because the context when we discussed it back then was about how there were these fundraising appeals that kind of played on it, right? And I will say, in fairness, the same organization that I went off on 6 months ago that used Kim Davis as a fundraising appeal for their Ohio organization, they actually didn't do a fundraising appeal on this latest coalition yet.
I think there's a reason why they didn't, because it wasn't so successful for them, I would assume. And maybe I don't have the data to that, so I can't say that. But it felt to me at the time like, really? You think that this is going to make people give you money when it's just not the issue that anyone wants you to platform right now? I do think it's important for us to never cede the space, to not allow anyone to claw back rights that we have gained. And I don't think that overwhelmingly you're seeing this massive appeal to undo what is now considered a religious institution, gay marriage, or Mardi Gras, as I like to call them. And then there was this essay a few weeks ago in New York Times that was saying that, America is turning against gay rights. And I don't know if that's true. It does seem to be this idea that, are they Gen Zers? Is that what we call them? That they are anti-sex and therefore are anti-queer people who tend to be more openly pro-sex. And maybe there's something to that. But if you were to look at the data, I don't know that it supports that conclusion. If anything, I feel like it's all about taking out any right in as many different ways as possible. For instance, in Florida, we see attacks on HIV insurance, ADAP, and you see a bunch of papers saying, great, we won because AIDS Healthcare Foundation filed a lawsuit, and now Florida is pulling back. And actually, no, now Florida is just following the procedural route because what they were doing was illegal. Now they're doing it in a way that's legal. So maybe the real concern is how much conservative people are trying to platform the erosion of rights across all boards. And we should all stand up and say, take your hands off my goddamn like gay Mardi Gras.
Yeah. We're going to obviously be covering this for weeks to come. I'm going to leave it there. I have so much more going on in my head right now. I'm going to leave it there for right now. And let's bounce
Wait,
around.
one sec. Was that, Jasmine, was that a fair read based on what the data is saying? Did I just pull that out of my ass?
I will say that, Gen Z women are like the most progressive in the country, the furthest to the left, most in favor of civil rights and civil liberties. And so I think there is some nuance in this framing that needs to be introduced.
And I guess the point there is, I don't think the data supports this idea that like folks are really wanting to get rid of gay Mardi Gras weddings. I know that there isn't a solid data point around that, but if you were to extrapolate, do you think that most people would say, screw the gays, no more ceremonies for them?
No, I mean, over 60%, that's the majority of Americans, say that they support gay marriage. I guess I don't know exactly how much that extends to the pomp and circumstance of a ceremony, but I assume, it does. And it's something that is an issue that many people's mind is settled.
I was going to keep this in my head, but I'll say it out loud. My fear is exactly where we were, right? That we go back to these conversations and this media coverage that's so much about marriage equality. And I think we're going to see this more in the legacy newsrooms, right? Like these legacy news, we're not talking about the 19th. We're not talking about the Buckeye Flame that actually have nuance to talking about LGBTQ plus issues. But we are talking about newsrooms who, oh gosh, I can't even put a hyphen in gender affirming, right? That are going to say, oh, we can now write about LGBTQ plus equality solely within the context of marriage equality. And so it's going to become this thing again where the conversation gets dominated and you have Black trans people saying, yeah, we're legit getting murdered over here. And so why is the coverage disproportionately covering marriage equality? And that's my fear. And by the way, I have that fear, to be fair, about the LGBTQ plus community, and specifically around white gay men, because we know, as we talked about last time we talked about this, that there were organizations that folded after marriage equality became the law of the land because there were so many white gay men who said, all right, we're done. We did it. We've had victory. So that's my fear. We'll see where the coverage goes and what happens. But for right now, we get to jump around to a couple different stories that you all have been working on. Jasmine, I did not wake up this morning thinking that we would be talking about Paris Hilton, but then here we are. Tell us about Paris Hilton's efforts regarding non-consensual deep fakes, another phrase that I knew next to nothing about before I read your reporting.
Yeah, so my colleague Grace Panetta and I covered this press conference that Paris Hilton sort of anchored. It was by Reps AOC and Laurel Lee, and it was calling for the passage of their bipartisan bill, the Defiance Act. And that would allow victims of non consensual deepfakes, sexually explicit AI generated images, in other words, to directly sue their abusers. And this is really important because it creates a civil cause of action that can be initiated by the survivor themselves. They don't have to wait for a federal prosecutor to press charges. And it's a way to recoup some of the costs that this abuse has racked up, not even mentioning emotional damages, but time off work to request image takedowns, lawyers to pursue copyright claims. It's a very expensive form of abuse. And in this press conference, Paris Hilton said that she was aware of over 100,000 sexually explicit deepfakes of her circulating without her permission. And she spoke really powerfully of how, as a young woman, her image was used without her permission. And this is, of course, her ex shared a quote unquote sex tape that the two of them made without her permission. And based on the number of copies it sold, seemed to have made a ton of money off of it. And she said, "They sold my pain for clicks." Oh, and that just, it's, it just hits you. And so, an update on this, the Senate has passed the bill unanimously, and now they're rallying for it to pass the House or even actually get a vote on the House floor, which it didn't last time. And I wanted to mention that this is really important because queer survivors of this kind of image based sexual abuse are more likely to be victim blamed and to have their experiences dismissed. And that really sucks because LGBTQ plus people are more likely to be targeted by these types of crimes. And side note, this was a huge plot point in Fire Island, the movie, and Joel Kim Booster based some of that off of his own experiences. But he's been vocal about what happened with him with so-called, we don't use this term anymore, but revenge porn, where his images were shared without his consent. And I want to say, if this has happened to you, I'm so sorry. I wrote an article last year about steps you can take, what to do if you want to pursue legal action, how you can get those images taken down. That's available on the 19th.
There's going to be more progress on that as it moves through the House. Juan Michael, a few days ago was National Black HIV and AIDS Awareness Day. I went through various different outlets. I did not see much coverage in the media. By the way, including in the Buckeye Flame. So we clearly have work to do there. Tell us why recognizing that day is so very important. Or was there a ton of coverage and I totally missed it?
No, there was not a ton of coverage. I think that in the past, you would see op-eds from heads of organizations, people living with HIV, and a lot of it would be from non-traditional or from organizations that don't typically write about HIV. It would be everyone. It's this sort of like commemoration day that everyone chimes in on, like Christmas. Everyone writes about Christmas. This year, not so much with the National HIV/AIDS Awareness Day. And I want to note that Tamar Braxton, she was on a panel with a friend, Masonia Taylor, who is living with HIV, and they spoke about the importance of this day, but that was probably the most high-profile coverage that I saw. Why it's important. So, according to the CDC HIV surveillance report from 2022, and I named 2022 because that's the last report that is available right now, 56% of all women living with HIV in the United States are Black. 56%. When you look at Black gay men, it's only like 31%. So even though Black gay men have the highest rates of HIV diagnoses each year, and they're eventually going to catch up to white gay men who have the highest prevalence of HIV at 34%, Black women have the highest diagnosis rates and the highest rates of prevalence across the country, and it's getting bigger. You see other groups containing HIV, but you don't see that among Black cisgender women or Black trans women. My concern here is that people start to blame us for our serial conversions. And so when someone says a gay person has HIV, I hate to admit this, but a certain part of one's brain goes, well, of course they do. They're gay. They're out there being gay, having gay sex. But when a woman, a cisgender woman has HIV, it's like, what did you do? What's wrong with you? And so it turns not only into blame, but into the shame around you must have been doing something really freaky deaky and awful as a cisgender or Black woman, and that's just not it. It's really about access. And so here's why it matters. Black women are not getting access to HIV care or prevention or just basic information. Neither are Black gay men. But there's a reason why we ignore Black cisgender women, because we always have. And the point I'm trying to make here is that anything bad that happens to Black women eventually affects the entire country. Black women lost more jobs than anyone else last year, mostly being laid off, and now that they're coming for the rest of us. And if we don't pay attention to this minutia, what seems like minutia, we're eventually closing our eyes while sand is being poured down our throats.
Thank you for that. H, some new research out there, and I'm always passionate about any type of research that lives at the intersection of LGBTQ plus identity and alcohol and other drugs. In full disclosure, I started my career doing alcohol and other drug education at New York University. It is a treasured part of my past, and some new research out there about some predatory targeted marketing against the LGBTQ plus community? How would you describe the new research that's out there?
Yeah, it's actually kind of complicated. So before I even talk about the actual study that I wrote about, the Department of Health and Human Services has previously estimated, this data is now gone, by the way, but they've previously estimated that LGBTQ people abuse alcohol in some way. About 20 to 30% of LGBTQ people are dealing with some type of alcohol abuse, and that's compared to like 9 or 10% in the general population. So we're looking at more than double, and there's very, very little research. So I wrote about a study that came out of OSU's LGBTQ Health Equity Lab. And what these researchers did was go out across Columbus to 24 different physical locations, liquor stores, grocery stores, and they sort of documented the types of alcohol advertising that they were seeing, particularly in the lead up to Pride. This was in June 2023. They started doing this research. It was published this year. As they were going to all these stores, the exact moment in our culture is Dylan Mulvaney and her very high-profile partnership with Budweiser. And as we all here know, Dylan Mulvaney is a white trans woman, and her partnership with Budweiser was an absolutely bonkers experience for LGBTQ people in the United States for several different reasons. So this was all happening while they were looking at advertising materials in these stores, and they're also looking for stuff that's just rainbow advertising, maybe a slogan like "Love is love," anything that would make an LGBTQ person more likely to gravitate toward that product. And we do call that predatory marketing. Like, these researchers are naming this as predatory, much in the same way they talk about predatory marketing in the tobacco industry and how the tobacco industry has targeted Black and Latinx folks for decades. So what they found is that, unfortunately, normalizing LGBTQ drinking in our culture and sort of framing it as a requirement, particularly for and around Pride, might be doing more damage than the visibility of somebody like Dylan Mulvaney. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, and we're just starting to see some of this research. It's not very well funded. Typically, tobacco research is more well funded. But LGBTQ people are really, really genuinely suffering from negative health outcomes their entire lives related to alcohol. And it is not something we can ignore, especially now because we're seeing more research that suggests alcohol is a carcinogen. And we're seeing LGBTQ people even with elevated rates of certain types of cancers. So this is very important work, and this is kind of just the tip of the iceberg. They definitely need more funding, and I'm curious to see what else comes out of OSU's Health Equity Lab. That was some really interesting work.
Yeah, I mean, if you're this is not me making a joke. This is truly serious. That if you are one of those nonprofit organizations that at a Pride celebration gets put right next door to the beer tent, you get astronomically higher signups.
Oh, well known. And
Yeah.
and drinking is part of Pride, drug use is part of Pride, and those things are also part of our culture in really deep and important ways. So it is a little complicated.
Yeah. More to talk about there, but for right now, you all are listening to This News is So Gay. I'm your host, Ken Schneck, from the Buckeye Flame, Ohio's LGBTQ plus newsroom. Joining me this week, H.L. Comeriato, also from the Buckeye Flame, Juan Michael Porter II from the Sero Project, and Jasmine Matani from the 19th. By the by, listeners, if you are not subscribed to This News is So Gay, what the heck are you waiting for? Subscribe to this podcast right this very second on your favorite podcasting app so that new episodes automatically make their way to you. Well, it is time, folks. It is time for Glitter Bomb. This is where our roundtable shares stories of queer joy that they are seeing covered in the news. So let's set off a glitter bomb. Jasmine, let's start with you. Give us some queer joy that you saw in the news.
I want to highlight a story from my 19th colleague, Sarah Luderman, who wrote about how disability rights advocates are standing with trans people amid attacks on their rights. And this is really important because trans people were originally excluded from the Americans with Disabilities Act. They were later reincorporated But it was this strategic negotiation where they were cut out. And now, 40 years later, the Trump administration is trying to take these protections away. Gender dysphoria is defined as a disability that you can get accommodations for in the workplace. And now disability advocates are fighting against it. And I think, seeing a coalition come together and also sort of like righting this historical wrong is something that's like really inspiring in this moment.
We love to see it. H, let's bounce to you. Give us some queer joy.
Baby, I am here for Durand Bernard. That was so
Yes.
much fun. That was so much fun. Cleveland native, Durand Bernard, out LGBTQ person. He won his first Grammy. It was so joyful. Everything is a little bit of a bummer, and Durand Bernard is not. Congratulations to him. We're sending our love.
Yes. And if you have not seen his acceptance speech, you must. It is some joy right there. Juan Michael Porter II, give us some queer joy.
So I don't know if this is so joyful, but this is HIV testing week in the UK, and Sir Elton John is out there ringing in the messages. And I just love it when Elton John puts his face out there to say, "This is important, you must go." That's a bad impersonation, but there you
No,
have it.
that was amazing. I love that old queen. I love that old queen.
I want him to do it like while playing Rocket Man, like go get
Yep.
tested, man. And knowing that so many people don't or think they aren't affected, and that he really has staked his entire like foundation and fortune on it and puts his face on it when he could just be like shagging his husband in like the Bahamas makes me so joyful.
We love it. That's queer joy indeed. And finally, the Winter Olympics are here with a record 46 out LGBTQ plus athletes competing, but it could be 50 if the four of us competed. So for this week's quick queer culture question, in which Olympic sport do you think that you have the greatest chance of medaling? H, let's start with you. Which Olympic sport?
Okay, here's the thing. I love sports, but I don't actually care about winning. I only care about friendship. So I would certainly be a member of a bobsled team. However, stipulation, they all have to be other trans masks. Put us in a bobsled. Please, let us cook.
That is certainly a reboot of Cool Running in a much different way for folks who don't remember that movie. Juan Michael Porter II, which sport would you medal in?
So I have to read the definition. Tobogganing is a winter activity using long, flat-bottomed and then skid to slide down snow-covered hills. And there you have it.
Incredible.
Tobogganing. You're welcome.
I am quickly moving on from that. Jasmine Mitani, what sport is for you?
Well, I'm in Los Angeles. I do have experience with snow. I lived in Chicago for 10 years, but so I'm going to pretend it's the Summer Olympics too.
Yo, yeah.
And I would say BMX simply because I can ride a bike, which is more than I can participate in many other Olympic sports.
We're going to look for that medaling. The correct answer was skimo. Is everybody on board with the new Olympic sport of skimo? This combines skiing up and down mountains, but it's also where you run up. It's basically if the chairlift is broken, that's what skimo is. You have to run up the mountain with the skis and then ski down.
Disgusting to me. That is horrifying. Horrifying.
Not a thing. Not a
oh my
thing.
God.
I'm obsessed with
Who?
skimo. We'll talk about it later in the newsroom. H, we certainly want to hear what you all are working on. Jasmine Matani, what's coming up for you at the 19th?
Yeah, I'll bring up two things. One, I mentioned I work at the 19th. I love that we value diverse perspectives and what we bring, what each of the reporters bring to the newsroom. So I have a story that's a little outside of my beat, but it is about these Filipino American protesters and the No Kings rallies, who, historically have like strong feelings, that community, about authoritarianism, encroaching authoritarianism. And I'm not Filipina, but I am Asian American and I'm from Los Angeles. So I love to represent there. And also, I'm going to be continuing to report on deepfakes and all this horrible stuff. If you, a queer person, have an experience that you want to talk to a reporter about, hit me up at jmatani@19thnews.org.
Please, please do. Juan Michael Porter II, what are you working on?
I just finished a wonderful interview for Philadelphia Inquirer of an activist based there. Her name is Cece Coven. She basically dances through stigma. She was diagnosed with HIV 19 years ago. She was 20 years old. She has two beautiful children who are blessed to be free of HIV. She has a husband, and yet people come into her comments saying the most foul shit.
Oh,
And she does not let it get her down. She just dances through it and educates them. And I'm so excited for people to know how they can participate in pushing back against stigma joyfully as well.
love it. H, this is the fun part where if you say something that surprises me, it will throw off my day. What are you working on?
I might surprise you because I do, before I mention what I'm working on now, which is fun and cool, I do want to remind everyone to please remember that LGBTQ people are also immigrants. You can be two things at once. You can be more than two things at once. So we've been doing some immigration and immigration enforcement coverage, and truly, I am begging and pleading everyone. There are 1.3 million LGBTQ immigrants right now living in the United States. They're real, they're here, and they need our support. Now, what I'm working on, I'm actually going to do a really, really cool story about Columbus Archery, which is a Black and queer-owned archery studio. And Antoinette Wooden founded it, and I had an incredible interview with her about the types of healing and community and all kinds of good stuff that we all need that she has gotten from this space and from archery itself, like actually working through trauma. Keep an eye out for that one. It'll be really cool.
I'm excited. I'm excited. But for right now, while we're keeping an eye out, that's all the time that we have for this week's episode. I want to, of course, thank our roundtable, Jasmine Matani from the 19th. Jasmine, always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Juan Michael Porter II, I know that perhaps the weather is not the same as where you were just a few hours ago, but we're happy to have you here.
So
That's
sorry.
a great bookend. It's a great bookend. HL Comeriato, I'll see you in the car on the way back to the newsroom.
Love riding home with you, Ken Schneck.
I'm Ken Schneck, editor of the Buckeye Flame. And if you liked this episode of This News is So Gay, please share it with a friend. Subscribe so that you do not miss out on our next episode. Send an email on over to editor@thebuckeyeflame.com. That's me, to let us know your thoughts. And please rate and review us on your favorite podcasting app. This News is So Gay is a product of the Buckeye Flame, a non-profit newsroom. Become a recurring donor today for as little as $12.50 a month, which I am telling you truly enables programming just like this. In the meantime, read LGBTQ+ news, share the stories of LGBTQ+ reporters, and support the work of LGBTQ+ newsrooms. Until next week, friends.